Hey everybody, Rock Guy here doing our third album review of the year. This time over an album that also came out a couple years back. Scott Stapp's solo album, The Space Between the Shadows. I think that's all I have to say for now. Yeah, as I said before, this is Scott Stapp's third solo album. Almost matching what he's done in Creed, just one album short. And I would say it's his most unique solo album thus far, for reasons we're about to explore in a few. Let's get to it. So The Space Between the Shadows, as I've said, is Scott Stapp's third solo album. And I did say it was his most unique album thus far, and I firmly believe that, for a multitude of reasons. One of such is I think this is Scott Stapp's first attempt at a deliberate artistic direction outside of Creed. So The Great Divide, which is an amazing album, I still think it might be my favorite Scott Stapp solo album, is very much a Creed record, in the same way One Day Remains was. After Creed's breakup, it's pretty evident that the sound was still very fresh in the eyes of Mark Tremonti and Scott Stapp, so it's no surprise that a lot of those ideas they had would bleed over into the first thing they do outside of Creed. So while I do enjoy The Great Divide, I more so see it as the last remnants of Creed in the world more than anything else, especially more than I do as a deliberate statement as to what Scott Stapp believes in artistically. Proof of Life was very good. It was a great album. It was the soundtrack to my college years, so it means a lot to me. Even so, I can't deny that it's a very commercially accessible album. It's an album primarily made to put Scott Stapp back on the map, if you will, as it features Daughtry's producer Howard Benson and a multitude of songwriters just trying to get the best hooks possible out of Scott Stapp. The Space Between the Shadows, however, does not really have that going on for it. Now, it is notable in that it was written with a bunch of songwriters. It was also produced by these same individuals, with Scott Stevens, Marty Fredrickson, and Zach Molay, I believe. But I have to give credit where it's due. They really seem to be working with Stapp in a band-type setting here. It doesn't feel like these guys are just trying to get the best hits out of Stapp. It really feels like they're committed to whatever idea Scott Stapp had for this record, and they're expounding those boundaries. They're pushing forward. They're working more as a cohesive unit as opposed to a producer or songwriter trying to find the best hooks possible. And I give them credit where it's due, as this album does have a more concrete direction, more consistent direction going for it than Proof of Life did. Now, the best way to break down The Space Between the Shadows is, of the 12 tracks, it can be split into 4s, with 3 subsections for each one. The first subsection is the most obvious. This would be Stapp's hard rock songs, with songs like World I Used to Know, Survivor, Purpose of Pain, and Red Clouds. These are all really great rock songs. They adhere to Scott Stapp's strengths as a solo artist and as a frontman, and they're really not too different from what we've heard before. I will admit that the sound is different. Like, it's not just a play-by-play for some of Stapp's biggest hits, but in terms of songwriting, you know, Overcome, The Madness, Slow Suicide, a lot of these songs kind of fit into the same umbrella those 3 songs fall under. The most unique of the 4 would be Red Clouds, which features this tribalistic rhythm throughout and a very unique solo that is something I've never even heard from Scott Stapp before, like between The Great Divide and Proof of Life. It really does emphasize how he's actually trying to push for something new on this album, something he's never done before. I love all of these songs. I think another unique one would be Purpose for Pain, which was Scott Stapp. It was written by Scott Stapp and the guitarist from Escape the Fate, I believe. And this one stood out to me because even though it does play on that strength that Stapp has, his chemistry between a vocalist and a guitarist, I would honestly say it's less unique compared to some of the other tracks on the album where he does shine a little bit more as an artist. Yeah, I believe the guy's name is Kevin Thruft? I don't know. I know his name is Kevin.
Your friend told you to come here?
Yes, sir.
And who's your friend?
A guy named Kevin.
Kevin.
I give him credit because he did write a good song with Stapp, but it doesn't really have that same chemistry that Stapp had with Tremonti, not yet. And I'll discuss that more towards the end of the review, what I would recommend for Scott in the future as far as regaining some of that chemistry. But for what it is a great song. World I Used to Know is really awesome too. Stapp's commentary on current world affairs, which is something I imagine he would write with even more details and more passion now since 2020, 21, and 22 have occurred. The world's In some ways, it is a little bit worse than it was when Stapp wrote that song in 2019. Survivor is cool. What I like most about Survivor is it's Scott referencing the demise he had, mentally speaking, in 2014 when he had that mental breakdown that basically offset his career for a little bit. It's showing that he's overcome that. He's prevailed. And he's working towards something good again. He's finally found his niche. He's finally found solid ground. And Survivor's a testament to that. The next 4 tracks that I'm going to talk about are basically the slower songs. And I would say these are the highlights of the album. This is some of Scott's best work ever, like counting Creed. And I think what makes these songs so good is it shows Stapp with complete control over his voice. They're not as fast or quick as some of the heavier songs referenced earlier, but they don't really need to be. And in being apprehensive, they are heavier. It's almost like less is more with these songs, and they really play to his strengths very well. Not just as a singer, but as an artist. These 4 songs, I could basically show to someone who hates Scott Stapp, and they would be very legitimate proof to that individual that Scott Stapp is growing as an artist. He is applying himself more and taking further boundaries. These songs, of course, being Name, Heaven in Me, Ready to Love, and Last Hallelujah. Now, I think a year before Stapp released this album, he was talking a lot about Chris Cornell and how influential Chris Cornell was to him as a singer, how Stapp viewed Chris Cornell as the best modern singer in rock music, or the best current frontman in rock music at that time. This, of course, being when Chris Cornell was still alive. And you could really see how Chris Cornell influenced Stapp on these songs, as these songs bear a very heavy resemblance to some of Chris Cornell's work. Maybe less Soundgarden or Temple of the Dog, but more so Audioslave and his solo albums. And I say that with utmost confidence. I really do believe that this is Stapp paying homage to Chris Cornell in the best way he possibly can, both vocally and lyrically. But in terms of vocally speaking, I would really recommend Ready to Love. Stapp shows off vocal range on this song that he never even showed in Creed. And that's something that makes this album very unique. I think it's one of the best songs Stapp has ever made, and I love it. It kicks ass. Name is beautiful. It's a nice homage to his son, who was born maybe a year or so prior. And it's pretty neat to see how much Stapp's family has influenced his songwriting. His family plays a major role in how he approaches his art. And that's a beautiful thing, honestly. I like it a lot. Heaven in Me is very beautiful, as is Last Hallelujah. They're basically Stapp reflecting on what occurred when everything went horribly wrong for him and contemplating his relationship with God and how his faith or his belief in God has pretty much guided him to a path that he needs to be on. Now, the last 4 songs on the album that I'm going to talk about are easily the weakest ones. And these are the ones where Stapp is writing music that I can't say is pandering to radio, but it definitely feels like it. Alright, these 4 songs, of course, being Wake Up Call, Face of the Sun, Gone Too Soon, and Mary's Crying. Of these 4, I would say Wake Up Call is actually the best one, mainly because it shows Stapp expanding his horizons a bit, again, which is something that tends to be a recurring theme on this album, is Stapp trying new things. As this song is basically Scott Stapp reappropriating a Lifehouse song. It's not my favorite song on the album. I think the child chorus is really, really corny, but I give credit where it's due in that it's a pretty unique song. So, fair game. Face of the Sun is a really, really lame track. I dislike this song a lot. To me, this feels like Scott Stapp embracing dad rock. There's really no other way to say it. Like, this is the most dad rock song on the album. And I'm kind of embarrassed that Scott would ever make something like this. It's not awful, it's not the worst song I've ever heard, but it definitely holds the album back. As I understand it, Stapp was planning to re-record Somber for The Space Between the Shadows before giving it to Art of Anarchy. And that is one of Scott's biggest mistakes ever. I think a newly recorded Somber, featuring Stapp's vocals as they are on here, would have made this album even better. And this actually felt like a personal kick to me because Somber has always been my favorite Stapp solo song. I think this is the closest thing he's ever come to actually making something on the level of a song like My Own Prison, Away from Creed. And it's a shame that it's not on The Space Between the Shadows, but Face of the Sun is. And it's funny because Face of the Sun would even be more fitting as an Art of Anarchy track, because Art of Anarchy tends to play into the rock tropes a little bit more. They do come from a very classic angle that would make Face of the Sun more appropriate on the madness than it is here. Mary's Crying is just kind of like a Christian rock song. Gone Too Soon is pretty much the bizarro version of Face of the Sun, whereas Face of the Sun is embracing dad rock, Gone Too Soon is embracing mom rock. Gone Too Soon sounds like a U2 song, and I hate U2. So, yeah, I'm just not feeling that one. I also think it's pretty weak, especially as a homage to a lot of the singers and musicians who have died in the years that Stapp wrote this about. I think it's dedicated to Chris Cornell, Chester Bennington, and Prince, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, it's pretty weak. I think it's definitely one of my least favorite aspects of the album. But even so, even with these 4 songs that aren't up to par with the previous 8, nothing really holds this album back from being as good as it could be. It's still a very well-made album. What's best about this album is those 4 songs I mentioned earlier with Name, Heaven and Me, Ready to Love, and Last Hallelujah. Stapp's really trying to make a name for himself this time as a solo artist and as an artist in general. And I would say he mostly succeeds. Maybe these songs aren't the best thing in the world to you, but they're still very good. And credit where it's due, he's really pulling through here. He's really expanding his horizons, and he's really doing what he can to make himself distinct while also placing himself on the level of maybe someone like Chris Cornell. So I guess it remains to be seen as to what directions he'll go from here. But I give a lot of credit for just even attempting these. So yeah, basically the best songs on this album are the ones where Stapp has the most control over his voice and the ones where he's really playing to his strengths. The other songs aren't really bad, but they're definitely very safe, and they do keep the album from being as good as it should be. It's still very good. I think it's a great album, and it's one of my favorites of the past decade. I hope for the next solo album, Stapp takes a little more artistic risks. He comes close here, but just a little bit more, as I think it would make the album better. And it would really show how far he's come as an artist since he got memed on in Creed and since he fell apart in the past decade. My solution to this, or my biggest recommendation to Scott, would be to work with a guitarist. As I understand it, Giannis, his solo guitarist, has really tried to write a lot more. He doesn't have any writing credits on The Space Between the Shadows. He has ideas, and I think Stapp should really allow those ideas to seep through instead of just writing with the songwriters he used. Even if the songwriters he used on this album were working in a very specific direction to make an artistic statement, overall I think this album would be better if Stapp made something much more organic. I really would like for Scott to go the direction of Scott Weiland and just do something similar to what Scott Weiland did with the Wildabouts, where he just picked up some guys who were really never professional musicians before, and he let them cut loose. He let them write an album. I think Stapp's musicians, or the musicians in Stapp's solo band, are very talented, and if Scott gave them the opportunity, they would write work that would really strengthen his career, really give him a solid direction. Much in the way how, I mean, I hate to do the Pearl Jam comparison, but much in the same way Eddie Vedder is using the Chili Peppers as his lineup for his solo band, where he's letting guys like Josh Klinghoffer and Chad Smith contribute to the writing sessions. I've always said Carl Bell of Fuel would be a good collaborator with Scott Stapp, so hopefully something like that comes into fruition sometime soon. And if not, well, I guess we'll see what direction he goes. I am curious, to say the least. I really don't want to say this album is better than Proof of Life, being that Proof of Life has a lot of personal significance to me. It has a lot of meaning to me as a fan, because I got that album during a very important period of my life, a very pivotal period of my life where I was consistently happy for most of the time. But yeah, I gotta say, he really did come through with The Space Between the Shadows. I love it, and I can't wait to see what he does next. So props to Scott, who finally getting the opportunity to branch out on your own and just keep on in the direction you're in. So yeah, guys, that was my new album review of the year. Like I said, this is an album I really liked. It was an album I was happy to listen to when I got it, and I thought I'd share some of this insight with you all. I don't think I've even seen a review, or at least a decent review of this album before, aside from someone just memeing on Scott Stapp. So I wanted to get these opinions out there, and hopefully some of you share those opinions with me. So what do you think of The Space Between the Shadows? Do you like it more than Scott's previous solo albums? Do you like it more than some of his work in Creed? Let me know down in the comments section below, and as always, be calm, be cool, be collected, and we'll see you later.